And our friend Jason Patterson, who you may see on ESPN television on occasion and other outlets as a play-by-play broadcaster, he joined us recently for his Eye on CWS series as he reports nationwide to stations all over the country on what's going on in Omaha. And Jason did that for us recently. And then, lo and behold, in a follow-up call with Jason, I find out he worked alongside Paul Mainieri in the broadcast booth. And as a broadcaster myself, I can tell you that's usually, you really get to know someone. I don't want to use the term intimate, but you get to know someone when you're calling games together, especially baseball. There's so much to talk about, so many breaks in between innings, and you really get to know someone. And I can tell you, I'll let the cat out of the bag, Jason Patterson, who's joining us now, he was excited to see that Paul Mainieri was getting the job at the University of South Carolina. So we had to have him on. We had you on, Jason. You really had your reporter's cap on last time. This time, we're gonna pull the curtain back a little bit on the broadcast booth and let people inside. It's going to be fascinating. Welcome back to Sports Talk.
Hey, always a pleasure to be on Sports Talk and always a pleasure to talk with you, Smitty. Now, let me begin by saying if there's a by-the-sea emphasis here, there should have been some emphasis on an in-studio type interview at this point. So, you're by the sea. You got to bring all of us down there at that point.
Well, I should have invited you. You're not wrong. I'll just say this, and we're going to leave it. The Sports Talk budget is not what it once was. That's all.
When you hear the by the sea thing, you just want to be all over it. So, congratulations to you getting the job done in the by the sea approach, and also to Phil and Chris for getting a few days off. Well deserved, that's for sure.
Yes. So, Jason, I said, you got to work with Paul Mainieri, and that's just fascinating. One of the things that we do get to do in our careers, because you and I, we grow up, and obviously we love these games, baseball and basketball and football, like so many people, and then we pursue them. And here you are. If you don't know about Jason's career, you can go to his website, pattersonsc.com, and it'll kind of give you an idea of some of what we're about to talk about, where he does play-by-play across the country. And so, sometimes you run across people like Paul Mainieri, and you get the opportunity to get to know them personally. This is someone that you wouldn't otherwise get to know personally, and he's a national champion, and he's a legend at Baton Rouge. And my first question has to be, his legacy was set. Did you get any inclination in working beside Paul Mainieri that he had an itch to get back in the dugout?
Well, Coach Tanner said it, that things maybe didn't end exactly the way Coach Mainieri wanted them to end at LSU. Obviously, it was his choice, but due to some health issues and some other things, it didn't go down maybe at the very end the way he wanted it to. And the one thing that those that have been close to Coach Mainieri over the years heard him say regularly in recent years was that, he didn't know exactly what the next season of his life was going to be. And if you understand how much of his life has been devoted to the game of baseball, and if you have any understanding at all of having been around the game of baseball, as you said we have for a lifetime, and how it gets in your blood and never gets out, I don't think there's any real surprise that he finds himself on the top step of the dugout again. You mentioned it. I had a chance to cover Coach Mainieri's LSU teams in Omaha and, of course, all along the road there with that memorable super regional he hosted in Baton Rouge that we were there to cover comes to mind against Mike Martin, when two of the great coaching legends of all time went head-to-head in 11s last year when he took that team to Omaha. And who can forget what Coach Mainieri was able to do when he hoisted the trophy, as you referenced, in 2009 in Omaha. So covered his LSU teams in Omaha and all along the road there in the different regionals and supers over the years. And you're able to get to know a guy a little bit, but then you sit beside of him in the broadcast booth and you said it's a whole different deal. We really grew to know one another working on the network broadcast on the ESPN side. And one thing that jumped out right away, if you asked me what my takeaways were from those days with Coach when he was kind of wading a little bit into the broadcast side of things, was that the knowledge of baseball was second to none. His understanding of the game, you're going to have that when you're talking about a national champion, right? But just the understanding of what was going on behind the scenes, and then his ability to break that down and communicate it in a way that viewers could grasp it, gave you a real understanding of how he was able to do that for his players over the years, Smitty. So just a few minutes with Coach Maneri, and I know you've had that as you've covered him, and those that are in the Columbia sports media market are going to get that more and more as the days go on. The one thing that's going to jump out at you right away is just his knowledge of the game, the depth of it. I mean, you think about it. We're talking about a guy that, you know, nobody else is going to be on the top step of the dugout this year with more coaching victories. He's going to be the active leader by stepping back in. On top of that, there are few still walking the planet who are in kind of the exclusive club he's in when you talk about wins and winning percentage and having a national championship. So his baseball credentials you can't argue with. I mean, they speak for themselves. But the type of man he is, the individual he's been, what has happened off the field with his teams and the respect level they have gained, you put that alongside of a knowledge base of the game, which is second to none. It's easy right away to see why he's been successful and easy right away to believe he's going to continue to be wherever his address was going to be. And I share your excitement that it's ended up being in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, over 1,500 wins for Paul Maneri. But forget the wins for a second. That's over 2,000 games, more than 2,200 games he's coached at the collegiate level. There's just nothing he hasn't seen, because you can multiply that by 20 when you talk about how many practices, how many ground balls, how many rounds of infield he's hit, how many times he's talked to his pitching coach and leaned over and discussed what the next pitch thrown should be, where he should align his outfielders. You know, those of us that are, in our 30s and 40s, we've seen a lot of baseball. This guy, it's tough to match the experience, although at 67 years old, which is what his age will be when the next baseball season begins, he's not even old enough to run for president in our country, according to our recent history. But what I'd ask Jason is, does he have the energy? Because everybody slows down a little bit, and it's one thing to be excited about getting a job, to be getting back into the sport, to go through the press conference. What about the recruiting? What about the grind of a season? What was Paul Maneri like, kind of energy level as a guy when you worked with him?
Oh, absolutely. No hesitation on my part with that question. And think about this. The Paul Maneri coaching tree has legends on it, okay? Brian O'Connor, who just carried his Virginia team back to Omaha this year, is a guy that was his pitching coach at Notre Dame when he made that trip to Omaha with the Fighting Irish before ever putting together that LSU resume that you talk about. I mean, we could go on, and the list is long of those on his coaching tree that would be considered baseball coaching legends. So that's just a window into when you talk about what, an impact he's had on the game. I mean, even if he wasn't coaching this coming year, his fingerprints would still be all over college baseball, but they really are when he works his way back into the dugout. And nothing you'll find energizes this guy more than the ability to pour his life into the life of young men and not only impact them in their baseball careers, but also impact them in their lives. That's what drives him. That's what puts that extra sparkle in his eye. You'll be around him for just a few minutes, and you'll come to understand that that's going to be what it's all about. Now, he's a competitor who wants to win as much as anybody you're ever going to come across, and that has borne itself out in his overall resume. But the passion is there and the drive is there to get back in the dugout, not just so he can be in the competitive X's and O's and chess match that is the game of baseball, but also to be back in the mix of investing his life in the lives of others. I think that's what you're going to see the energy be born out of, the knowledge that he now is going to have an entirely new generation and an entirely new region, a guy who's made an impact in everywhere he's been, an entirely new region in which he could come on board and get the job done at the University of South Carolina. And, I'll make one comparison for you in talking about Coach Maneri when you talk about guys who have maybe stepped away from the game and come back, and maybe they're not in the beginning stages with that drive and that fire that everybody wants to talk about of youth, but can still come back and have success. I mean, think about what Bruce Bochy has done at the big league level. Here's a guy who stepped away after leading San Francisco to those championships. He was out of the game for a few years, much like what we're talking about with Coach Maneri. And the question when he came back to Arlington and took over at the helm of the Texas Rangers, how would he fare? The game's changed a little bit. There's some new wrinkles that you have to work through. There's some added, rules adjustments. And not only that, the things you have to do outside of just the X's and O's of managing these days. And that's what you heard, right? Can Bruce Bochy step back into that scenario and be successful? How successful was he? First year back in the dugout, world champion, and the first world championship that Texas had ever known. And part of it was because of the fresh set of baseball eyes he was able to put on their situation. You had the same formula in many ways, Smitty. A team that was really close, a manager that had an old school approach to baseball, but understood how to balance that with all the tools that are now available, which is something that Coach Maneri is no doubt going to give you based on just what he shared to this point related to his approach at South Carolina, and in the right mix and the right time. Now, am I saying there's going to be a national championship in first year? Absolutely not. But you should see progression. You should see growth. You're going to see the passion, and the track record speaks for itself. And South Carolina is similar in many ways to the comparison I'm making with the Rangers, because this is a team that 2 years ago was a step away from Omaha, Florida, that eventually played for the national championship, owned by them in the super regional round to get to Omaha. This is a team that had a chance to make some noise against the eventual Omaha team in NC State this year, and was one step away against LSU, no less, from playing for the SEC championship. So this is a team that Coach Maneri, you think he looked at the landscape of not only college baseball, but this job and what fit it was going to be for him. He knew in South Carolina he had a team that was right there. You heard that in his voice. You saw it in his demeanor at the press conference. So you take that formula to put it together, and I would make it very akin to what happened with Bruce Bochy. And I make that comparison because here's a guy that has a baseball approach, a baseball mindset, a baseball bent. And when I say that, I mean, we're in an era in the game now, Smitty, where so much goes back to numbers, but there's still those elements of baseball that can't be quantified. And here's a guy that likes to hit and run, put the wheels in motion, move the runners with the bunt, understands the mix of using all the information that's coming his direction, but also has that old-time baseball gut that he'll rely upon in key situations as well. It has served him well over the years, and I believe there's going to be kind of a newfound energy that wells up inside of him when he gets an opportunity to put that hat on once more.
Well, it's worked for Paul Maneri 1,501 times. That's how many NCAA victories the new baseball coach at South Carolina has. Jason Patterson joining us. Again, check out the website, pattersonsc.com. Jason, I know you'll be going back out on the road calling football and other sports this fall. And so we'll track you there and on Twitter. Jason, how about this? You can't go a day, and today was no different. You can't go a day without a major story about the effect of NIL, transfer portal, or essentially television money invading us almost. We can't just be in our sports cocoon because all of those elements factor into what we talk about and the teams we cover. You sat beside Paul Maneri, you're calling those games. What was his attitude toward this new era, which is very much, I think, what people consider a player's era in college sports?
Well, any player that played for him, I mean, Bregman on down, the list is incredible. They're going to be guys that are going to tell you just what a player's manager he was along the way. And here's a guy who not only loved by his players, but his assistant coaches and everybody, broadcast booth as well, who's ever been around him and been a part of anything that he's had his fingerprints on. And you bring up, the one thing that now is the discussion, regardless of whether you're a returning coach or an existing coach. I mean, these are the new wrinkles that everybody's having to deal with. This is the kind of the new approach that is kind of, it's almost been in some ways, the term Wild Wild West has been used. It's certainly something that everybody's kind of wading into and trying to figure out exactly how it's all going to play out. And that is the biggest wrinkle that anybody coming back to the game or those working their way into the game in a new role have to navigate. For that, I would kind of point to what he told us in the press conference when he took over, right, Smitty? That is, he has a guy in Monty Lee who's been navigating that across the last few years as one of the premier head coaches with plenty of success in this state on both sides of the rivalry, and now back at South Carolina, having been acutely aware of what was going on specifically with the Gamecock program. And, he built the bridge when the coaching change was made. And the value seen in Monty Lee immediately communicated by Coach Maneri. You think about how much he will no doubt rely upon him. And the AD knows a thing or two about winning championships as well. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Ray Tanner who closed down Rosenblatt and opened up the downtown era of college baseball in Omaha with back-to-back titles. And I'll remind you, that nobody has done that since. Still the last team to do it. So there's plenty of people surrounding him. And the one thing that you'll notice right away as well about Coach and the way he handles his business is one of the things I always admired about him, even covering him from a distance when he was at LSU. He surrounds himself with the right people in the right spots and allows them to excel and use their specific gifts so that the team as a whole can move forward in a very positive fashion. So in answer to your question about some of the new things that have to be navigated in the sport, I think he's already been wise in making sure he surrounds himself with people who at least are understanding that as much as anybody understands it right now, because they've had their hands in it. Not only had their hands in it in the game as it exists, but also have had their hands in it at South Carolina. That, I would think, serves the program well and will serve him well as he kind of wades in to back into the dugout there as the head man.
Yeah, tremendous insight and a great point there. It's going to be Paul Mainieri as captain of the ship, and Monty Lee will be his lieutenant, who, as you said, he's had his hooks, and he's really had to wrap his arms around NIL, transfer portal, and everything else, all that's come with college athletics in the last 5+ years. Jason, it's been great insight. Well, I'll let you leave with this. We got so much out of you, so much great information and analysis leading up to the final game, Tennessee and Texas A&M. And I don't know, you went to Omaha, you thought you were going to watch baseball, you stumbled into a circus as Schlossnagle ended up not, he laid into one of his own reporters, and then he takes the Texas job the next day. I know you kind of knew that he was going to take that job, and maybe that was a poorly kept secret there in Omaha, but how about what you witnessed? I mean, the whole thing, Tennessee and Texas A&M, we were going to have a first-time champion. We got a first-time champion. The series was dramatic. And then Schlossnagle went ahead and did a mic drop on the whole thing in his post-game press conference.
Rejoined his old TCU AD there in Austin. And wouldn't you know, it happens the very week that Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC, so that the first battle between the Aggies and the Longhorns again in a non-postseason way, as it's kind of had to be engineered. You know, whether it's basketball or whether it's been baseball, it's been postseason engineering forcing those teams and those two athletic programs to play one another across the last several years. No more. As of right now, they're in the same league. So you've got the whole coaching piece of it. You've got the history of that rivalry. And you've got the new look era of it just means more SEC with that wrinkle added to it. You're right. Omaha was a buzz in the press box, in the hotel lobbies, certainly down in the underbelly of the stadium there at Charles Schwab, as everybody was trying to figure out, is that going to go down? Exactly when is it going to go down? You know, does Tennessee lose this thing? And do they have a coach that's looking? Does it happen with Texas A&M and everybody understanding the history between the AD and the current A&M head coach, while he continued to give assurances that none of that was happening in backdoor ways? And then in the end, you know, your eyes see what your eyes see. So all I can say, Smitty, is it's the era we live in, you know, for good or ill. So many of these things are what you kind of have to deal with right now. You hope the focus remains on the game and the game gets stronger. I think that's our heartbeat. But when it comes to some of these storylines that are developing, it just makes you want the season to happen tomorrow, because the SEC is going to be even crazier, even stronger, and even more entertaining than it's ever been, it would seem, moving forward.
You know what, Jason, you just hit on something, and I know we'll let you go. We've got to go to break and all this stuff. You and I could do this all day, but you just really hit on something. I think what has been damaged, because everyone's concern is always the game. We completed one of the most entertaining college football seasons. College baseball, are you kidding? I mean, you were there. The excitement that the college baseball postseason all the way through the College World Series was brilliant. NCAA tournament, brilliant. I can't get enough of between the lines. All this has done, however, is damaged the talking seasons. All of this, the coach movements, the player movements, the NIL disputes, the court cases, it's everything outside the game, I think, that's been hurt, and the game itself has endured.
That speaks to the strength of the game, does it not, and the beauty of the game and how it keeps us coming back. Because I'm with you, you know, you would hope and your desire would be that this thing's always going to stay about the student athlete and the development of young men, to teach them the values they need to be members of society. They're going to be fruitful going forward, to be respectable. You think about what we celebrate this week, American citizens who can make their mark on this culture in this country in a positive way for a lifetime. And you would think it would also remain about the fans and the rivalries and the loyalties and the connection that can be made between those players and those coaches and those individuals that have given themselves to these universities and these programs as a part of their fan base for a lifetime. Some of that may be suffering with a number of the things we're seeing, and my hope would be, Smitty, just to kind of, as you said, leave you with this, my hope would be that somehow, some way, we find a way to get back to a place where it is about the fans, it is about the development of individuals, those rivalries are protected, and the passion that has made college sports great is somehow preserved for generations to come.
Jason, thank you so much. We will check back in with you. Go relax as best you can before I know it gets crazy this fall, and we'll track what you're doing at pattersonsc.com.
That sounds great. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks, Smitty.
That is Jason Patterson. Great insight there on Paul Mainieri. Who he is as a guy, and I'm doing my best to express to you listening, maybe you've never called a game alongside a legendary coach. There are some of us who are not, who didn't have great careers. But because of what we do for a living, we've had the opportunity to break bread or work alongside some prominent names. And you get to talk and pick their brains, or maybe you're in a circle listening and learning, kind of a lunch and learn with a legendary coach or a great athlete who had played at the highest level. And I know I've had those opportunities, and I can tell you it is what you hope it would be. 20 minutes listening to someone who is a Hall of Fame coach off the record is invaluable. And Jason Patterson got that kind of relationship with Paul Mainieri, and you can tell Jason was impressed and believes Paul Mainieri is going to be a success in the dugout at South Carolina. So it's fascinating insight, really interesting, and you heard it, does not question Paul Mainieri's energy. He thinks that's, some people, you've got old 66 and young 66. And Jason Patterson certainly believes Paul Mainieri, new head coach